Are the DLCs in The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion canon to the Elder Scrolls series? The answer may not be as straightforward as you think. What's up guys, Acer Thorn here, and welcome to another video game lore and discussion video. I do these analysis and discussion videos on a regular basis, so if you'd like to see more of them, hit that subscribe button to stay notified. Now I should preface this by first saying that I am not including Knights of the Nine or Shivering Isles in this discussion. This discussion is limited only to the Thieves Den plugin, the Fighter Stronghold DLC, the Lair DLC, and the Dwemer Orrery DLC. Now, before anyone posts a comment, let me address the argument I already know 99% of you are thinking of. Just because the DLCs are released by Bethesda does not necessarily make them canon. If that were the case, and we absolutely have to accept anything coming from Bethesda under the Elder Scrolls banner as canon, then that would mean that the Space Core add-on for Skyrim is also canon, as it was co-released by Bethesda and Valve to promote the release of Skyrim's creation kit. However, if we accept that the Space Core add-on is canon simply because Bethesda co-released it, then that means that the Elder Scrolls franchise takes place in the same universe as the Portal games. These kinds of franchise crossovers are inherently risky, as you are essentially saying that anything that happens in one game necessarily happens in all other games as well. However, saying that Portal and the Elder Scrolls take place in the same universe is even more risky than most other crossovers for two reasons. First, the Portal games have already been fairly firmly established as taking place in the Half-Life universe, so it's more than just two franchises that coexist together. And second, in the climax of Portal 2, as Chell is nearly jettisoned into space, we can briefly see the planet that Portal takes place on, and it is clearly meant to be a facsimile of Earth. Honestly, at that point, it's easier to simply say that the Space Core add-on isn't canon to the Elder Scrolls, and if we accept that, then we have to accept that being released, or at least co-released, by Bethesda does not automatically make something canon to the exclusion of all other factors. So we have to analyze each DLC on its own merit to determine its status as canon. Let's start with the Thieves Den plugin, as it is the easiest to declare non-canon. This DLC was originally intended for Thieves, but not Killers. For Killers, you have the Lair DLC, we'll get to that one later. Anyway, when we arrive at the location known as Dunbarrow Cove, we find that the place is now haunted by the undead skeletons of a former pirate crew. As we enter the captain's quarters, we find his diary. Herein lies the fundamental problem with declaring this DLC to be canon. He claims to have been born in the city of Dunbarrow on the northern coast of Skyrim. The only problem is, there's no such city as Dunbarrow, not in Skyrim or anywhere in Tamriel. Now I know what some of you were thinking. The Elder Scrolls games, from Morrowind to the present, have been heavily scaled down compared to Arena and Daggerfall. Gone are the days when Elder Scrolls game maps are the size of actual real-life provinces, where they literally take days or even weeks to traverse without fast travel, and every city is completely interchangeable with each other. Therefore, we have to accept that there are cities in each of the various provinces that aren't represented in modern Elder Scrolls games. That is a good point. However, even in Arena, where the game map and settlements are actually life-sized, there is still no city, town, or village known as Dunbarrow, least of all along the northern coastline of Skyrim. If Bethesda wanted this DLC to be canon, they had three prime choices for the sea captain to give his place of birth: Solitude, Dawnstar, and Winterhold. Just pick one of those, everything else would have been hunky-dory. Now, some of you may point out that this journal is dated in the year 3E286, which is 103 years before the events of Arena and 597 years after the events of Elder Scrolls Online. There's plenty of time in between those two games for the town of Dunbarrow to get settled in, then die off. That may be true, but frankly at this point you're stretching almost as much as you would need to stretch in order to justify the Space Core add-on being canon. Think about it, even if the city of Dunbarrow may have died out before the events of Arena, shouldn't there still be some archaeological evidence that the city at one point existed? You're telling me that the town of Hactor, which I assume is of comparable in-universe size to Dunbarrow, has existed from the Elder Scrolls Online all the way to the events of Oblivion 747 years later, but Dunbarrow just disappeared without a trace during that same time range. Give me a break. So I'm sorry, but the Thieves Den plugin has a hard time getting the Canon seal of approval from me. Next we have the Vile Lair plugin, which provides the player home known as Deep Scorn Hollow. First of all, the person who set this place up in-universe is clearly a whack job. First, he writes in his journal that he became a vampire because Sithis spoke to him in a dream and told him to become one. Then he says that he had a dream where Sithis told him that only vampires are supposed to be Dark Brotherhood assassins. Later, he says that he had another dream where Sithis spoke to him saying that he isn't meant to be a vampire. Obviously, both cannot be true at the same time, so instead this guy is just a whack job. But that alone doesn't make this DLC non-canon. There are two things that bring this DLC's canonicity into dispute. First, in the reference to his vampirism, he says that his sanguine ways have offended his dread father. The problem there, however, is that vampirism is the sphere of Molag Bal, not sanguine. Of course, that alone doesn't necessarily contradict canon lore, as I've established this guy is a basket case, so perhaps he believes that his vampirism comes from sanguine when it really doesn't. No, the biggest concern comes from the Purge Blood Salts. You can place these in a giant swimming pool and swim around in them, and that quickly and painlessly cures your vampirism. These Purge Blood Salts actually work as intended, so they can't just be this guy's delusional ramblings. Now, some of you might reasonably ask, how come this makes the DLC not canon? Well, the short answer is because if curing your vampirism is this easy, why hasn't this cure been mass circulated? Surely there are at least a few thousand vampires in Tamriel who would leap at the opportunity to cure themselves if only they knew it existed. Glitches aside, speaking purely in-universe, the vanilla quest to cure your vampirism involved seeking out the one person in all of Cyrodiil who actually knew how to do it. The vast majority of citizens of Tamriel have no idea that a cure for vampirism is even a possibility. And yet here's this guy offering an instant cure for vampirism for sale. Bear in mind that this guy isn't just setting up shop in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, he's setting up shop in Wanet Inn. Think about that for a second. This isn't just any ordinary inn he's setting up shop in. Sure, there aren't very many NPCs in the game who frequent this inn, but that's probably done due to processing and memory limitations. This inn sits at the edge of the bridge that serves as the only way into or out of the Imperial City. So hardware limitations aside, in-universe, this has got to be one of the busiest inns in all of Tamriel. And here's this guy openly offering a quick and painless vampire cure to anyone who's willing to pay for it. I can imagine that very few actual vampires may have simply stumbled upon this guy without realizing that he had the cure available for sale. But given the number of people who necessarily pass through this inn on a daily basis, I'd imagine that enough people would know about the cure he has for sale that word of it should spread to any interested vampires in a very short amount of time. Now, who's to say that word doesn't spread like wildfire? Maybe the Purge Blood Salts only recently got discovered and word starts spreading about their existence immediately after the events of Oblivion. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't hold up to scrutiny either. Greywind's journal entries are all dated in the year 3E421, 12 years before the events of Oblivion. so the purge blood salts had to have been discovered and invented no later than that. So I'm out of excuses. There's no way the cure could be this easy without it having been mass distributed by this point in Tamriel's history. The only explanation that makes any sense at all is if we accept that Deep Scorn Hollow, the Purge Blood Salts, Rowley, Eardwolf, none of these people or things actually exist in Tamriel. Bethesda just wanted to give the player a means of curing their vampirism quickly and painlessly, so they just slapped the DLC together without any regard for whether it actually fits into the lore. And if Bethesda didn't have any regard for it being canon, then maybe we shouldn't consider it to be canon. Also, side note, but does this sound like deja vu to you? The vanilla game's Vampire Cure quest was buggy beyond belief, so instead of releasing a free patch to make the Vampire Cure quest smoother and less painful, Bethesda instead charged real money for a convenient alternative when they themselves created the very inconvenience that makes the convenient DLC appealing in the first place. Gee, does that sound familiar? Next, we have the Fighter's Stronghold DLC. In fact, this was the DLC that inspired me to make this video in the first place, as when I was doing a Let's Play of this game, one of my fans posted a comment about how this entire DLC sounded like some elaborate conspiracy theory. The story behind this DLC is that the previous owner of this castle one day found the castle under attack by marauders. He had to sell off all of his castle's furnishings in order to fund the resistance, but the marauders keep coming. Eventually, after selling off all the castle's belongings, he still hasn't completely warded off the marauder attackers, so out of desperation, he has sent out a public notice promising control and ownership of the castle to literally anyone who manages to liberate it from the marauder invasion. Okay, first of all, how did the marauders manage to keep up the assault for this long? How many people are members of this marauder gang if they wear down and eventually conquer an entire fortress just through sheer attrition? That's not a marauder gang, ladies and gentlemen, that's a rebel army. If they're that damn strong, either in skill or in numbers, then why settle with just some random fort? Why not instead try and take the entire city of Coral? For that matter, if they really are that strong, I'd honestly be more interested in hearing their backstory and having an entire questline dedicated exclusively to wiping them out. That would certainly be more interesting than what this DLC actually offers. However, that doesn't make the DLC not canon. That's just a big missed opportunity on Bethesda's part. Anyway, why doesn't this guy just go and hire the Fighters Guild? The castle is within farting distance of the city of Coral, which is home to the Fighters Guild's Guildmaster. What, you can't just send a courier in the Cloak of Night to Coral's North Gate to recruit the Fighters Guild to fight off the Marauders? Isn't that literally what the Fighters Guild is there for? And then there's the issue of actually furnishing the castle. It uses the vanilla system for furnishing player homes. The home starts out empty except for a bed, and then you go to X specific merchant and purchase the deeds to the homes, at which point the furnishings magically appear on your homes in predetermined locations. This system works fine for the player homes that are in the vanilla game, but it completely breaks suspension of disbelief and immersion when juxtaposed against this DLC's backstory. The implication is that the merchant who sells you these furnishings has actually been holding on to these furnishings. These aren't just some new upgrades to the castle, they are the actual same items. How can that be? I thought the previous owner of the castle had sold them off to fund the resistance. This seems more like a pawning service. For that matter, how did he even manage to transfer all that bulky furniture to the Imperial City to sell it off? Now, any one of these problems individually would not cause this DLC to be considered non-canon. However, all of these problems collectively lead me to conclude that Bethesda did not make or release this DLC with continuity in mind. As such, because being canon was not a priority for Bethesda when making this DLC, maybe we shouldn't consider it to be canon either. last but not least, there's the Dwemer Orrery. This has got to have the most problems associated with it of all the DLCs I'll be talking about today if you want to classify it as canon. It's basically an astronomy tower addition to the Arcane University. Once you've collected all the various parts to repair it, you can go there and obtain a variety of greater powers, which simultaneously buff one attribute while draining another. Its only real gameplay utility is to give the player access to the Drain attribute spell effect for use in custom spells and enchantments, but that's not the point. I'm not here today to give a critique of this DLC from a gameplay standpoint. I'm here today to argue why this DLC shouldn't be considered canon, and oh boy, are there quite a lot of flaws in that department for me to talk about. First, since when have the Dwemer actually settled in present-day Cyrodiil? I'm pretty sure it's well established in lore that the Dwemer resided in present-day Morrowind, Skyrim, High Rock, and Hammerfell, but certainly not Cyrodiil. Second, even if they had some presence in Cyrodiil, why is this astronomy tower the only Dwemer architecture in Cyrodiil? Shouldn't Cyrodiil be dotted with Dwemer ruins just like Morrowind and Skyrim are? Third, even assuming the Dwemer saw the site of the present-day Arcane University as the ideal place to set up an astronomy tower for reasons, how come the rest of the Imperial City is clearly alien architecture if there was Dwemer presence here once? Fourth, how come the Dwemer Orrery is in a state of disrepair at the start of the game? I thought one of the most mystical things about what is left of Dwemer culture is that their machines and technological wonders are still fully functional literally thousands of years later after the Dwemer's disappearance with no maintenance whatsoever. So the fact that I need to go around the Cyrodiil map collecting various parts so we can repair the Orrery kinda kills the mystique just a little bit, right? Fifth, assuming that this might be literally the only Dwemer construct in the history of Tamriel to ever actually break down, how is it that this chick somehow knows how to repair it? Nothing against Bosmer in particular, but I've always thought that the Dwemer had engineering and scientific knowledge that far outstrips even the smartest race that is playable in any Elder Scrolls game. The idea that there is one specific person who isn't even trained as an engineer, but instead as a mage, is able to understand the inner workings of this Dwemer construct to the point where she is able to repair the Orrery all by herself. She only needs you to go and fetch the parts she needs to fix it, is laughable. Speaking of her credentials, that leads me to my sixth and most important part of all. Even once you finally get the Orrery up and running, actually using it produces a magical result. You are given a greater power depending on what time of month it is. This goes against literally everything that Dwemer culture stands for. The Dwemer are supposed to despise anything related to magic, instead believing in the superiority of their own purely technological achievements. So what the hell is this Dwemer construct doing, providing magical benefits to those who use it? All in all, the only way I could possibly consider this DLC to be canon without it completely shitting all over the Dwemer lore that has been painstakingly crafted over the course of the entire franchise, both before and after this DLC came out, is if we accept that this isn't actually a Dwemer Orrery. Aesthetically, it may be designed to mimic the Dwemer's architectural style because the person in-universe who designed it was a big Dwemer fanboy, but it isn't actually of Dwemer origin any more so than the Dwemer armor or weapons I can craft at a forge in Skyrim are actually of Dwemer origin. However, there is absolutely zero indication that this is what the developers of this DLC were going for when they made it. They just thought to themselves, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had something to represent the dwarves in Oblivion, and made the Orrery DLC without any regard to whether it fits into the lore. In other words, it was made without any regard to it being canon. Therefore, it is not canon. As I said earlier, just because Bethesda released these DLCs does not make them canon. If they were canon, we would have seen some evidence of them in other games. For example, the Purge blood salts would have been mentioned in Skyrim, or the Dwemer Orrery would have been available at the Arcane University in the Elder Scrolls Online, since that game it takes place after the Dwemer's disappearance. Whether or not something is canon does not matter much if you're just wanting to play the games and have a good time, but it is crucial if you care a lot about discussing lore, because whether or not something even qualifies as lore determines whether it's even eligible to be factored into the lore discussion. Because duh! So this video may seem like pedantic nitpicking to some. It is admittedly a niche demographic that I am targeting with this video, those who genuinely care about their lore. If you are not among that demographic, then I apologize for wasting your time. So, with that being said, I bid you all adieu. Acer Thorn out. Peace!